Who's ready for a tier list video essay? So you all know that there are lots of chain reaction machines and domino setups that appear in movies and commercials and the like, and if you've been following my channel for a while, you know that I've slowly been making analysis videos on them one by one. But today I'm taking all the builds I've already talked about, all the ones I want to talk about and will talk about, and I'm ranking them. Because sure, I can talk about these projects individually, but don't you want to know how good they are, at least compared to each other? Like which ones utilize better techniques and how, and like what makes a machine like the one in I Spy better and more optimized than say the one in The Great Mouse Detective? To start, I made a list of 45 chain reactions from across all forms of media with the help of suggestions from the building community. But before I make the tier list, I want to talk very quickly about how I ended up selecting these 45 chain reactions and how I'm going to rank them. There was a lot of chain reaction art that I had to watch and review, and quite a few projects didn't make the final 45. That doesn't mean this is the only tier list I'll ever make, maybe I'll add to it eventually, but that's a thought for later. Here were my selection criteria. 1. It must have a somewhat high level of production or fame. Ones that are almost instantly recognized by many as the chain reaction from that movie or commercial, but I still included some more obscure projects because even if they weren't classic or iconic, maybe they were still from a popular franchise and probably had some audience anyways. The fact that there is so many chain reactions to dig out from so many different productions gives me hope that maybe one day I can be like binging with Babish, but instead of recreating famous food, I recreate famous chain reactions. Who knows, right? 2. It must be a chain reaction that's naturally integrated into its production or narrative. So it can't just be a famous chain reaction builder appearing on a segment of a show to talk about or showcase their work, because the main focus there would be the builder, not the art. I'm looking for iconic art. My original goal was just to include chain reactions from major pieces of work that just happen to have them. Though I've come to realize that chain reactions are rooted in their homemade creative aspect too, and I think it robs a whole side of this art form to leave out one of the most important ways to build it, so a couple of hand-picked homemade or independent projects are included too. 3. It must be a project where the creators and designers went through the creative process, like material selection, planning, building, and toppling. So it can't be something like an impromptu challenge on a show where the contestants are just given everything they need. And 4. No projects that I've worked on. There are an increasingly large number of these iconic chain reactions made by builders directly from YouTube's chain reaction community, and I believe chain reaction styles will continue to go in this direction. That being said, there are quite a few projects I have been a builder for that probably would have qualified for this list, but this is just to keep things fair. So those are my selection criteria. These chain reactions will be ranked on a tier list with S, A, B, C, and D tiers. Now here's the ranking criteria. 1. Watchability. I will be judging how much of a single fluid chain reaction it is, with every step or idea being recognizable and easy to follow. 2. Originality. So how much motion variety or trick variety there is, how well it expands on the art form, or even how well it demonstrates classic chain reaction techniques in its own way. But it won't rank very high if it's just another regular domino line or just balls on tracks. 3. Theming. This one's a little less important, but this is just how well the project fits the theme of its narrative. I'll mainly be looking at the chain reaction quality alone, but little nods to the theme of the overall piece of work will land some extra points. And 4. Size. This one's straightforward. Builds with more steps or dominoes will get ranked above builds with less. And there are also a few things I will not be judging. 1. Camera work. Camera work always has a big impact on how chain reactions are perceived, but I will not be judging it, since that's the work of the film crew, and not the builders themselves. 2. Dominoes against machines. These two art forms have different standards, so I'll just be judging how well that project does for its art form. And also because in my opinion, dominoes are way underrepresented compared to machines. 3. Animation against real life. Again, I get that the two mediums have different standards, so we'll just be looking at how well that chain reaction does for its medium. Other things to note. The order of the chain reactions on every tier doesn't represent a ranking within the tier, it will just be the order that I go through them in the video. Chain reaction quality is very subjective in my opinion, so I can't really judge them any more in depth than just placing them on one of these 5 tiers. And on the topic of subjective chain reaction art, yes, you could probably make a case for each chain reaction to be, say, 1 tier higher or lower than where I place it, and I wouldn't argue with you. Just know that I'm not trying to pull the rug out from anyone for the sake of looking cool like, surprise, this obviously really good one is actually D tier. No, none of that. This will be a straightforward, honest tier list, and all my rankings are my genuine feelings. For this tier list, I will start with the 6 chain reactions I've already made separate videos for, since I believe that among those 6, there are at least 1 in each tier. So starting here will be a good chance to see what an example for each tier is. Then I will go by category through movies, TV, commercials, music videos, and then everything else. Here we go! We are starting with the Balloon Popper from I Spy School Days, and this is definitely a good one to start with. This one had me super captivated as a kid. There are so many different motions contained within such a consistent theme of materials. His chain reaction logic is so solid that all you need to do is look at a picture of it, and you know exactly how it will work. And it's so cool that there's actually footage of it working in just the way you'd imagine it to based on the picture. Of course, there are nitpicks in my standalone video about it, but considering some of the chain reactions coming up later, this one sets a pretty good standard because it can definitely work in one take, it's got so many motions understandable through a single picture, and it has a very deliberate set of materials. And that's why the first chain reaction in this video, I believe, goes to S tier. Next we have Big Weld's build from Robots. This one's a fun animated domino setup with some machine elements, and again, for animation I'm totally ready to suspend my disbelief for things that may or may not work in real life. Slanted dominoes on an incline, or dominoes flying from seesaw to seesaw, not my biggest concern. What actually kinda gets me is how much the setup changes from shot to shot. Like, how does it go from these straight lines to these crossing lines? How does the project lead into this kind of field when there's no indication of what the field starter looks like? So I do feel like this setup loses points for watchability. Fun animation though, and it still makes it to B tier. Moving on to V's Insignia from V for Vendetta. It's got a very nice circular path starting at a point at the bottom where all the dominoes can spread out, and for a setup that branches as much as this one does, it's still very easy to watch. It's a very deliberate and well thought out design for the insignia, pulled off with an amazing use of color changing dominoes to add details to the image. Like, this is exactly what you use this field design for, boosted by such a smart use of color. Everything is so right on the nose. Anything built by Domino Day builders will probably end up in S tier, and this one is no exception. So yeah, V for Vendetta's domino setup goes to S tier. Well, I'd say we're off to a really good start. What's next? Fine. The double brick domino effect from TikTok and other social media trends is not very complex, and not very groundbreaking. It's really hard to look past the fact that the setup for this trend is literally just a single domino line. There aren't really any instances where someone used a more creative material than bricks either, but the fact that it does utilize one popular chain reaction technique makes a little bit of a difference, and that's why it's at least on C tier. The breakfast making machine from Chitty Chitty Bang Bang is super mechanized, but in this case it shouldn't put it on a low tier. It still works in one take, and it's a convincing way to break an egg. Even if its presentation is a little more mechanical than usual, it toys with a lot of cool chain reaction concepts like rotations and levers, and that keeps it away from like a complete factory machine feel. Of course, seeing the physics and connections of the movements would put it higher, and that's usually a little more detrimental, but I think for this machine it still does enough to make A tier. And finally, the booby traps from Home Alone. Guess what? These are borderline not chain reactions. The humans are the driving factors and constantly interact with these contraptions to keep them going. What little chain reactions these contraptions have in them are so unoriginal and still so human powered. So the last of these first 6 chain reactions, I believe, is our D tier. With the first 6 out of the way, let's now go through the rest of the movie category, starting with Der Lauf der Dinge by Fischli and Weiss. Believe it or not, this was the work that inspired me to start building, and it led me down my first chain reaction YouTube rabbit hole. Looking at this work technically, it has such a wide variety of steps and plays so much with different scales of motion, but the pace of the machine feels kinda awkward because a few of the slower chemistry-oriented steps take up a lot of the watch time and can start to feel repetitive. And since the viewers don't know exactly what the chemical reactions are, it's not always clear what's supposed to be happening, or what the next step is supposed to be. I don't know if I can quite put it on S tier for that reason, but it's still a very deserving A tier. Next up is the gate opener from the Goonies. A lot of these steps are reasonable, though the chicken laying an egg was probably fabricated. There are always so many variables with using animals in chain reactions that it's just so hard for me to believe any step involving one nowadays. Overall, it's a machine of pretty short length, but it makes very good use of front yard elements, and it definitely feels like it belongs in this kind of setting. I'll put it in B tier. Eventually, the breakfast maker from Pee Wee Herman will get its own video for me, but I'm actually really not a fan of this one. Watching it leaves me with so many questions. What is this wheel connected to? How does this dinosaur start moving? There are too many things going on at once, and it goes from toast to egg to pancakes in 3 back-to-back shots, and it's clear they're all triggered separately, because this machine really is just a bunch of components stitched together as if it's one unit. Then there's a 2-minute cutaway where Pee Wee Herman goes to brush his teeth, and then when he comes back, the entire breakfast is just kind of on the plate with no indication to how the machine got it there. So I don't care that this is one of the most iconic machines in cinema, or one of the most whimsical purposing of objects. This machine is C tier. You can't change my mind. Okay, I promise I'm not going to rant about more than one breakfast maker, but now we have the breakfast machine from Back to the Future Part 3. And this one at least does have a smooth path of action with a left to right sequence of steps, so yes, watchability points there. Some of the connections are strangely non-existent, like the pulling of the pan, but at least the next motion starts where the viewers are already looking. So good object utilization and pacing is just kind of a short machine, and I wish some of the connections were a little more clear. I'll put it on B tier. Now we have the Cookie Factory from Edward Scissorhands. Do you remember when I said Chitty Chitty Bang Bang was mechanical, but at least had understandable chain reaction concepts and doesn't feel like a factory? This machine has the polar opposite feel. It feels like a factory, and wouldn't you know it, it literally is a factory. You could not recreate these kinds of motions unless you're doing it mechanically. So chain reaction? Sure, but more like an assembly line with no visible connections. It's a C tier. Moving on to the Toast and Jam Launcher from Wallace and Gromit. I don't know much about Wallace and Gromit, but I think maybe Wallace makes a lot of contraptions? There isn't really much to talk about chain reaction wise for this one because it's so short. It doesn't consist of any sequences or concepts, and honestly, kinetic art probably wasn't what the production team was going for, so unfortunately, it's a D tier. Now we have Ratigan's Trap from the Great Mass Detective. This machine runs a little differently than the others on the list, because Basil sets it off early to avoid getting killed by it. Looking at Ratigan's original design, there are no connections to be seen besides a single string, so there's no telling how they all get triggered just by looking. The chain reaction leading up to the early set-off is literally just a marble track, so I can't give this setup much for originality. And I know I'm not judging animation, but like, come on, at some point you gotta draw the line between intentionally zany and just ridiculous. Like, the ball's not even in the corkscrew, it would fly right off, and what is this? Basil foresaw all that happening based on some impromptu calculations? It's just funny that the production team probably sat down and said, okay, we need to think of some reasonable and foreseeable way for this machine to get set off alternatively, and this was the best they could do. Get in the D tier. Okay, how about we talk about something better, like the Domino art from Collateral Beauty. This is one of only 2 movies on this list past 2010, and this is everything I hope chain reaction art can start to look like in the times to come. It's a little less cohesive than what I'd consider to be S tier work, probably because the production team asked for busy shots with multiple structures falling at once, rather than a neat sequence of well-placed, deliberate techniques. But the chain reaction logic is super sound. A project like this would definitely work in one take, and I know these builders know their stuff. Very solid A tier. Okay, the opening scene from Superman 3. Back to talking about garbage. Just like Home Alone, this scene is brought up occasionally in chain reaction discussions for being, another human-powered sequence of events. So for the same reason that Home Alone is D tier, Superman 3 is also D tier. No more of this, please. The hotel contraptions from Hotel for Dogs are up next. I like the practicality, but honestly, these are just kinda forgettable. Like, by the late 2000s, the whole whimsical, prop house looking machine that's focused almost entirely on usefulness trope just seemed really common for chain reaction art, and even then these machines have nothing on any of the machines in movies before them. This movie doubles down on the really short, really mechanical contraptions kind of feel, with nothing memorable enough to actually dive into, and I'm led to believe the film only shows the final steps like the shoe kicking the door, or the finger pushing the buttons, because there's probably not much else to the machines connection-wise. But still some cool concepts, I guess. C tier. The last one on our movie list is the machine from the Introducing Lula scene from Now You See Me Too. This machine is short and sweet, and the integration of magic tricks like the 3 cups or the teleporting flowers are fun. The pacing is very fast, probably because the machine isn't supposed to be the highlight of the scene and it's not really meant to show anything. I even forgot it was here the first time I watched the movie. It's really not much, so I'll put it at C tier. Moving on to chain reactions from TV now, and right away there are 2 that I want to mention, those 2 being Pythagora Suichi and Domino Day. It goes without saying that these 2 are amazing. They are the spawn of the modern day machine and domino styles, and it's crazy to think they influenced so much while to this day still having distinct and seamless styles of their own. Obviously these aren't the first ever chain reactions, but at this point in domino building, and at this point in machine building, these builds did something that every single build in production before them didn't. They made generations of builders want to recreate and expand upon builds in this style. And that's exactly why chain reaction communities exist today. Everything about these 2 is classic and perfect, and they are undoubtedly S tier. Let's move on to the machine in Designs on Jerry from Tom and Jerry. This is actually a very convincing animated chain reaction, and something that probably wouldn't even take too much modification for every step to work in the real world. I do see some little nitpicks, like no way the boat would go in such a straight line if it's being blown by a fan, but again, that's okay when addressing animation. It's no showstopper style-driven build, but it's very clean, understandable, and diverse in its steps. This is exactly what animated chain reactions should look like in my opinion. This work is a solid A tier. Hal's incredible run from Malcolm in the Middle demonstrates a good amount of homemade chain reaction concepts for a TV setup and has a nice integration of household objects. And it's filmed as if all the dominoes were accidentally set off early, everyone's favorite chain reaction cliche. Aside from one random split off towards the beginning, the whole setup is very easy to follow. Ha, and this wall technique is kinda trying to be a speed wall, but maybe the builder didn't know what they were doing. I think this is a fun setup that, in a way, still shows the fun of building at home, and overall, it manages enough to make it to A tier. Going back to back with the sitcoms, now we have Spencer's Fish Feeder from iCarly. I love the look of it, but a lot of the steps at the beginning go by too fast. It does a good job of going through many different surfaces like the floor, the table, the counter, and this wall pillar, but at the cost of jumping from place to place using these really quick transitions. Lots of long connections, typically strings, could make it really hard to follow the action if there weren't cameras following it for us. but still really nice material and step variety. This is still a B tier. Next up is the Prank Machine from Adventure Time. It's charming on first watch, I'll give it that, and a really nice animated machine in 2D space, but what's going to bring it down is its use of gnomes. Multiple times. The machine isn't quite gnome powered, but it's still kind of a cop-out when a lot more of the steps should have been actual object motions, and then you just expect them to stand there until the machine goes off. This one is a C tier. And staying in cartoons, here's the machine from A Horseshoein from My Little Pony. Another one of those short and sweet machines, but wow, yeah, this one goes by fast. The first part with the bubbles going down the tube takes just as long as the next 80% of the machine. There are actually some really nice additional details like the clamp on the scissors and the seesaw connections that really make these motions feel secure, but due to the length and the pacing, I'm just going to keep this one on C tier. The Christmas special machine from Mythbusters is solid overall. Nice to see we can totally count on a show like Mythbusters to deliver on a DIY sciencey looking machine. I love the Christmas assortment of materials, and I love how many different kinds of motions we get to see. The chain reaction logic is pretty sound, though not quite as sound as an S tier. A lot of these connections look a little sloppy, the materials look like they're not in decent condition, and they put a blast step in the middle of the machine that faces towards the rest of the machine. But don't get me wrong, I don't mind a DIY feel, and for all aspects that this machine is good in, I'm saying it makes it to A tier. The last of our chain reaction projects from TV is Eraser Dominoes from Tonari no Seki-kun. I love that it's erasers because Japanese builders do so many amazing things with these erasers, but I can't rank it too high because 75% of this is just a regular domino line. It fits its atmosphere, I can see what's going on, but it doesn't look like much or try to be more than just a small desk setup, so I'm putting it at C tier. Oh, and apparently there was a live adaptation of this scene with lots of really dramatic reactions. Our first commercial is this iconic one by Honda called The Cog. This is probably one you've seen on quite a few other occasions, and I love it, it's so clean. It goes to great lengths to intentionally make certain steps just barely work, like the fan that slows down right when it hits the pole, or the barrel that hits the lever on its last possible rotation, and that is so satisfying, kudos to these designers. I will say that this machine's one downside is that it's not always clear what exactly every object is, since it's exclusively made out of car parts, but at least this machine gets nice deliberate actions out of them. I'm putting this in A tier. The next commercial is by Panera Bread, called Live Consciously, Eat Deliciously. This machine focuses very heavily on its set pieces, like the bakery and the farm, and sometimes that makes it feel like it's putting all its eggs in one basket. It's super cool to see all the steps that change the set, but there are so many split-offs, so many things that happen off the main path, and that makes it hard to focus on the main movements as I'm watching. I'd give this machine more points for its atmosphere than its kineticism, and because of that, it's a B tier. Here's one by 3M called 3M brand Rube Goldberg machine. I'm going to bring back some previous talking points for this one. This machine pretty much falls in between what I consider to be mechanical but chain reaction at heart, and factory. There are some parts that are really cool, and other parts that are just electronic and hard to understand, and this machine just straddles that line. I love the rolling and swinging bits, and you could make the case for this to be higher, but I'm keeping it in B tier. Now we have a small commercial segment for Phineas and Ferb called Art Class. This machine has a couple really clear and distinct motions, but then just sort of tucks the rest of itself away behind them. And with the big motions just being things like rolling or flipping, this machine doesn't really try to be much originality-wise. I do think this is a charming machine, and it does what it needs to do, but it just doesn't do anything more than C tier for me. Our next commercial is by Domino's, called Delivery Chain Reaction. I didn't look too much into who made this, but doesn't it look very similar to Panera Bread's? Both machines have circular designs that represent a part of their business cycle, with all these custom-made set pieces. This machine does a little better than Panera's in terms of clear motions and path of action in my opinion, but since it still doesn't really have the depth of a top tier, I'm keeping it in B tier. This next one is by Target, called Gadgets and Goldberg. On first watch I was thinking, wait, are commercials allowed to be this good? It's got launches and slides and things falling perfectly into place, and everything's just so easy to follow. It's even got a basket to stop a can from rolling around. You barely ever see that attention to detail in production style builds. This one's going straight to the top of the list at A tier, and I know I shouldn't have a favorite one among the commercials, but yeah, it's probably this one. Now for one by Nestle, called Good Care Machine. Like all these commercials, this one is good with its atmosphere and product placement, but this one has so much stuff happening simultaneously, which is especially hard to watch when some of the steps turn electronic like this train, and you don't know which steps are actually part of the machine or not. I get that as part of the message that the machine represents a human body, and bodies always have multiple functions, but then it really takes away the watchability. This machine is a B tier. Next we have a bit by ESPN, called Sports Nation Machine. This one is really good. I think the motions look the most distinct and authentic to what a chain reaction machine should look like out of all the commercials on this list, even better than Target. Everything is fluid, you can see the actual woodwork behind each step, and then it goes through a nice variety of surfaces and surprisingly fine-tuned motions. The only reason it's not my favorite commercial is because there's one step with these two people, and it's filmed like it's part of the chain reaction, but I've been over this, it really doesn't count as a step. You just stopped all the action to watch two guys push a button. Unfortunately, that just brings it down for me. Still an A tier, but no more humans in chain reactions, please. Moving on to one by Pokemon, called 25 Years of Memories. At times this one does put more work into the set pieces than the chain reaction, and that's not to say immersion is a bad thing, but the backdrops shouldn't overshadow the art. It still shines through with its chain reaction at times and demonstrates many fundamental motions well, like auto tilts and ball lifts, even if they're done a little more mechanically. This could just be one of those instances where the builders know their stuff, but it just comes down to the decisions of the other designers and people on production. This one almost falls to B tier, but because of the size of the machine and how well it keeps its atmosphere, I'll put it in A tier. Before we move on to music videos, let's talk about this last one by Star Financial Group, called Domino Commercial. This one was actually built by the Domino Wizard himself, the dude that popularized domino toppling as an art form and held the very first domino world record, Bob Specca. There's a clear message behind this commercial with all the separate fall downs representing various things to be managed, all coming together and leading to the star. The paths are well done, but I can't see this chain reaction as much originality, being just lines. Plus, that is a very outdated way to build a star. I like this commercial though for how it represents its message, and I think it fits right in B tier. There are only 4 music videos on the first version of this tier list. The first one to talk about is This Too Shall Pass by OK Go. I'll start by saying I love the look. It doesn't look like it's overdone with prop house items like ones in movies and TV, and it doesn't have any super custom-made framework that we typically see in advertisements. It has this authentic, made-in-a-warehouse feel that it pulls off without any connections looking too sloppy. The gradual increase in scale from beginning to end is perfection, and the music synchronization will land some extra points with me personally. I always get this childlike wonder from watching this, and I think its once-in-a-generation kind of inspiration puts it with the rest of the best on S tier. An Honest Mistake by The Bravery is a nice combination of dominoes and machines with a convincing sequence of action and good pacing. I like when the chain reaction is actually incorporated into the song rather than just being a flashy barrage of clips while the music is playing. I think both music videos so far have done a great job of that. There's nothing really memorable about the style of this chain reaction, but it still stays true to watchability and originality with quite a lot of size and variety to go with it. I'm comfortable putting it in A tier. Next we have Russian Roulette by Red Velvet, and if I'm being honest, this one is everything the first two aren't. To be fair, the chain reaction isn't the focal point of the music video for Russian Roulette like it is in the first two. There are only a few shots of dominoes, plus this one machine used as a backdrop that we never get to see in action, though I can kinda tell it's missing some connections. There are some really nice bright colors at use, but other than that, everything just looks disconnected, and this work could have been so much more. This is almost a D tier, but I'll keep it at C tier since there's at least a little more to it than the D tiers. But let's end on a high note with Tuna Milk by A-Track and Tommy Trash. This is all beautiful work, and for once I feel like I could almost just turn my mind off while watching it all fall down. Built by the Kinetic King, the majority of this chain reaction is a separate art form from dominoes and machines, just dubbed kinetic art. And not only does this work display almost every technique known to kinetic art, it plays with so many different scales of motion while weaving in some domino and machine sections too. This work is one of a kind, and I think it belongs on S tier. Now if only the camera work didn't give me motion sickness every time I watch this, like, you don't need to get that close to everything. Let's wrap this tier list up with chain reactions from other miscellaneous forms of media, starting with the independent project 10,000 iPhone 5 Domino by Atma Studio. It's definitely no top tier piece of work, but a nice one that maybe your older relatives will find and send to you. There's not much to its design as it's just lines of iPhones, and most of the split-offs and flourishes have no purpose or pattern, but I do like the video sync at the end, which gives this chain reaction a reason for using phones instead of regular dominoes. I like this work, and it's a good fit for a B tier. This next one's pretty well known. It's the board game Mousetrap by Hasbro. This is my footage of a version I own. I'll give this one credit for being a chain reaction that was designed to be built at home by anybody, and is automatically understood by anyone who plays the game, so this one won't rank too low. There is one issue though. It almost never works all the way through. Like, imagine you're in a position to manufacture whatever pieces and actions you want, and you have low barriers on the stairs, a vibration trigger for the cage, and a marble rolling horizontally into this rod to push the rod up. It's a B tier. Now we have the web series Jiwi's Machines by Joseph's Machines. This is a 4-episode series where each episode features Jiwi building a machine. And wow, are these machines just built different. They go beyond any basic sequence of objects from any other machine on this list. Things get reused in creative ways. The way every concept is demonstrated is so elegant, and these machines tie seamlessly into the actions of the characters and the premise of the episode. These machines are not just the best of the famous chain reactions tier list, but some of the best machines of all time. Joseph Herscher is really something special, and this goes to S tier. I'm going to end the tier list on two independent projects that I think represent the modern day building community really well, those two being the Lemonade Machine by Sprice Machines and the Amazing Triple Spiral by Hevish5. These two projects really show how far chain reaction art has still managed to go since Pythagoras Soichi and Domino Day. They rival large production type projects that still thrive in personal build spaces, and I think this style is exactly what every builder needs to see if they too want to be encouraged to build these things in their own spaces at home. There's still an emphasis on being able to present your ideas just as well as you conceptualize them, and that's what makes these projects so well rounded. And so, our tier list ends on another double S tier. So that's the tier list. Thank you for watching till the end. Chain reactions in media are a welcome experience, no matter where they rank. There are things I love about each one no matter where it ended up, and we definitely shouldn't be looking at the lesser ones as bad, just because they were in a lower tier. Looking at the tier list in its completion, the S tiers are definitely the boundary pushers, being majorly influential and a one-of-a-kind inspiration for future generations of builders. But the A and B tiers still set a good standard for what general chain reactions in media should look like, and show all essential chain reaction logic in an understandable way. While the C tiers can sometimes be messy, simplistic, or lacking in idea variety, it's honestly only the D tiers that don't bring anything to the table in my opinion, being borderline not chain reactions at all. Still, it's always so nice to see productions paying tribute to chain reactions and expressing themselves through a build so creatively. I hope we can see many more of these in the years to come. Thank you to the following builders for submitting your famous chain reaction suggestions and really helping me compile the final selection list. A link to the tier list template is in the description if you want to try ranking these chain reactions yourself. After some time, I may come back to this tier list and add on more ones I've missed or ones that have come out since this video, but again, that's for another time. Thank you for watching, thank you for supporting chain reaction art, and if you completely disagree with any of my rankings, I'll add the undisputed untouchable king of chain reaction art, and there were definitely no other takeaways from this video. Thank you, bye.
This car is gonna go around this track, hit this thing, make that tank, shoot at that target, and spill fish flakes into that bowl. Here we go.